Wow, thank you very much, guys. So yeah, code with confidence using PHPStan is what I'm going to discuss today. And what I've done is I've broken this talk down into 4 different sections. So the first one is a little bit opinionated because it's my definition of what confidence of code means to me. Then I'm going to discuss what static analysis is, so why you should care about it and why it's great. Then I'm going to talk about how to install, configure, and run PHPStan. And then after this, I'm going to tie it all up together, and I'm going to give you some recommendations of how to increase your code confidence of what I've laid out at the first point using PHPStan. So before I jump into all of that, who am I? So I'm Peter Fisher. I'm a PHP contractor. I've been playing around with PHP for over 20 odd years. I'm also the host of How to Code Well. How to Code Well is a YouTube channel. It's a Twitch channel. I've got like 400, 500 course tutorials, quite a load of courses on PHP, Linux, Python, all sorts of stuff. And I also have a podcast. So I live stream on Tuesday evenings around 6, and then Sundays on Twitch around 2:30-ish. So that's fun. Okay, so I'm planning to give this talk to various user groups and hopefully maybe conferences in the future. So this is my GitHub public repo that you can get the slides from. So with your feedback, I'm hoping to update the talk so you'll be able to get it there. There's also the feedback link there from Joined In. There's a QR code right at the end as well. Okay, so let's get into the actual talk. So what does code confidence mean to me? Now, I've got a feeling it's going to mean different things to different people because of their different experiences of different projects and stuff. But in my experience, at least, there are 3 types of projects that every programmer would deal with in their career. The first one is a new project. So this is where someone comes to you with an idea. They just have an idea that they want to build, and you have not decided yet what kind of programming language or framework or library you want to use. So it's completely box fresh. There's no architectural decisions that you've made. There's no frameworks, libraries as I mentioned. There's no bugs because it doesn't exist. And there could be some end users waiting for this. There's probably going to be a shopping list of requirements. And if it's a business that's asking you to do this, it's probably going to have time constraints. The second type of project that you'll probably deal with in your career is a legacy project. Now, this means different things to different people. Legacy projects actually get a bad rap because it could be spaghetti code, right? So the code could be a total mess, but it could work. It could have a mixture of frameworks. I've been on projects where there's many types of jQuery, many types of all sorts of craziness. The code could be completely out of date, but could still be working. But it could be very old. The PHP version could be very old too, and so you're kind of restricted with what you can do. It could, in my experience at least, have poor technical documentation, and it could also have 0 or very few tests to actually say that the thing that the requirements document actually is working. There could be lots of known issues. So there could be a bugs list, and there could also be a lot of unknown issues that you're yet to discover along your coding journey. There could be many end users, and some of those end users could be complaining that your thing doesn't work as good as they want it to. And there could be performance, security, data integrity issues, and you could therefore have a low confidence that any of your changes that you're going to make to the legacy application will actually work and work well with the current code base. So here I'm thinking in terms of you're a developer new to the legacy code base, so you've just inherited this code base. The last one is migrations and rebuilds. So this is where you have made the decision, or the decision has been made that this legacy application now needs to be rebuilt. This could have happened due to all sorts of issues like performance issues. There could be auditing that went through to make this justification. You will have an existing user base, and there will be like an issue with downtime. Like if you migrate it and rebuild it, then you need to actually keep it alive as you're doing that. So there's all sorts of challenges with that. There's going to be probably a bunch of workarounds that everybody is aware of, and they're probably not documented. but yeah, so that's actually quite a fun thing. I've done a few of these before. It's quite fun because you're literally trying to do the impossible, moving something that's currently working into a new place without breaking it. That's fun. I want to talk about the dream. So the dream of code confidence. In a new project, what we want to do is to start clean and continue clean whilst building up confidence with our code. So this is a new project, completely box fresh. We want to be aware of known issues before we actually do our very first deployment. Right? Imagine you've just spent months building this lovely piece of thing. You deploy it, and then it falls flat on its face. So you want to know what the issues are before those issues become apparent. So you want to create a continual integration pipeline to report errors nice and quickly. You want to spot potential gotchas in your new architecture. And you want to ensure that the team follows the same rules, the same coding standards that are set out. Essentially, what you want to do is move quickly whilst building stability. That's the dream of a new project. For a legacy project, you want to quickly identify issues whilst building up the confidence in the code base. So be aware of known issues that are currently sort of lurking in the weeds of the code. Clean up existing code smells, so find out what those code smells are, and enforce coding standards and rules in the CI if you don't already have one. You essentially want to standardize the code base, and therefore, by doing all of this, you're going to be making the developers on your team happy developers, and a happy developer is a performant developer. Okay, so the dream of a migrated project is to ensure the migration is smooth with as little disruption as possible. So end users should only experience positive changes. Be aware of the risky areas and to keep the data secure when you do the migration. When I think of code confidence, I think of this. The dreaded 3 a.m. phone call or Slack message on a Saturday morning after the Friday production deployment versus knowing that your code and everyone else's code will get checked before it goes anywhere near production. So how do we get there? Well, there's many tools that we have in our toolbox. There's PHP mess detection for cyclomatic complexity checks. There's PHP code sniffers for code sniffing and linting and stuff. There's unit tests. Please tell me you're all unit testing your code for ensuring that the code is actually doing what the requirement document says it should be doing. There's also static analysis. So moving on to the second part of this talk, what is static analysis? I pulled this from Wikipedia. Static program analysis is the analysis of computer software performed without executing any program, in contrast with dynamic analysis, which is performed on programs during their execution. So what does that mean? Well, static analysis will search your code for non-coding compliance without the need for code execution. Therefore, it is incredibly, incredibly fast. It compares the code against a given set of rules. It tells you which file and which line doesn't conform to which rule, and it prevents very bad things from happening. This is a dummy example of type checking. So this should never ever happen. You've got a variable here, which is you're instantiating a new standard class, and then you're adding 5 to it. Well, that just won't work, uncaught type error. But I've seen this before. Something worth to note is that PHP's type system is at runtime, which means that let's say you have a ticket coming in, a bug, you will need to actually process those steps. Maybe you have to go through a form, you have to log in, go through a form, fill out some customer details to actually then get to that point in which the bug happens. The code needs to run for you to actually see the error on the site. Static analysis, however, can do all of that statically. So there's many static analysis tools. I'm going to talk about PHPStan because that's the one I know more about. PHPStan, you can read the documentation from phpstan.org. It is open source, but there is pro paid features in there as well if you want to check them out too. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about PHPStan specifically, so how to configure it, how to install it, how to run it. So this is how to install. Composer require --dev PHPStan. Please do this in dev. Do not run this in production. There is no need to have this on production in a production build. You should have checked your static analysis before it even touches prod. Okay, this is the first run. So what you would do here is PHPStan analyze, and you're giving a path to analyze or a file. In this case, we're going to analyze the SRC. Because we haven't given it any parameters to this command, it's just going to run off of defaults, and I'll discuss what those are in just a second. This is an example of when things go well. So in this case, we've done 293 checks, 100% of those, and we have no errors. Yay, we can all have a beer. This is an example, however, when things don't go so well. So this is catching an error. So what you can see here is you've got the line, which is line 84. You've got the file, which is download a code download. And then you've got this nice little output here, which explains what is wrong, but it also explains how to fix it. So in this case, what we're doing is we've got this method called getFileName, and it should return a string. But actually, static analysis has processed this method, and it's not only returning a string, but it's also returning a null. Therefore, we've got this one error. This is the fix. So this is the error. Sorry, this is the error. So you can see that we've got the question marks. So this could be null, or this could be null, and then that gets returned. We're actually returning string here, but what we should be doing is returning null or a string. So the fix would be to put in a question mark as a return type. PHPStan has a series of levels. So this is where we get into the weeds a bit. So currently there are 10 run levels, starting from 0 going all the way up to 9. 0 would be the default. So if you just run analyze SRC, you'll be running off of 0. Each level changes the strictness of the check. Running at level X will also run all the levels before it. So you've got like level 5 will run level 4, level 3, level 2, level 0, and all that jazz. Now, I did poll, I've got some notes here of the various different checks of all the levels, and I will be here all night to go through all of them, but I'll just give you a little quick taster. Level 0 is actually quite thorough. It does basic checks, it checks for unknown classes, unknown functions, unknown method calls on this, wrong number of arguments passed to the methods, and variables that are always undefined. So that's actually quite a thorough check, just to run it off of level 0. Level 1 is possible undefined variables. Level 2 is unknown methods checked on all expressions, not just this, the variable this. Validating PHP docs as well. Level 3 is fun because that does return types. Level 4 is dead code checking. That's interesting. Level 5 checks the number of arguments passed to methods and functions. And then 6 does type hints, and it goes on and on and on, up to level 9, which also deals with the mixed type checking, which is so difficult to sort out when you've got legacy code and everything's just a mixed type. That's fun. That's fun. I do a lot of this when I'm doing my live coding and pulling my hair out on the Sundays, but I enjoy it. Okay, so this is how you do a run at a given level. So in this case, we're running at level 5. As I mentioned, that'll do 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0, can't count. And that's running against the SRC directory. Now, this is how to ignore code. So here we've got a private property here, first name and last name. So you would think that they would be strings. But because we haven't defined their data type, PHPStan will throw a wobbly. We can ignore them. This is how you would ignore the line, and then this is how you would ignore the next line. And of course, you don't have to use this kind of syntax. You could also use the double / if you wanted to. Okay, let's talk a little bit about configuration. This is pretty awesome. I really like the way PHPStan allows you to be quite custom with configuration. There's two ways of doing it. There is the neon format, which there's two files in there, phpstan.neon and phpstan.neon.dist, or you could configure it through the CLI, the command line interface. So neon is very similar to YAML. So if you've ever used YAML before, this is just a sample of the configuration. We're running against level 6. These are the paths, so we're testing SRC and we're testing tests. So it's pretty good. But this is where it gets super interesting. The priority order of PHPStan. So let's talk about this. So the first one, if a config file is supplied via the CLI, then that will be used. So you could have a custom configuration file passing in the -c flag. If that isn't there, it will use the phpstan.neon if that exists. If it doesn't exist, it will use phpstan.neon.dist. And if that doesn't exist, then it will use the default. Why is this so cool? It's because of line 2 and 3. What we're doing here is we're saying, let's put phpstan.neon.dist in source control and ignore phpstan.neon. This gives the developers the ability to override what's in our continual integration pipeline, which is great. So add phpstan.neon to git ignore. Of course, you could include other configurations, so other rules if you wanted to, and you would do that through configuration like that. This is an array of config files. This is an example of checking the paths of both the CLI and in the config. So you would just give another argument, say analyze SRC and tests, or you could just do that. Of course, there's going to be times where you want to exclude files. This is an example of how you would exclude paths in the config. But I'll explain why that's kind of dangerous in a minute. And also, this is another one that's a bit dangerous. Ignoring errors. So this is a regular expression using the hashes as delimiters. So any error that has function and then PCNLT, PCNTL open, not found, any of those errors will just be skipped. Okay, now I could go on and on and on and on about all the configuration of PHPStan, but it's probably best to have a look at the config reference there. The next part of the talk is to discuss how to increase code confidence using PHPStan. Now I've mentioned what PHPStan is and what static analysis is. So what I'm going to do is go back to the start of this talk where I was discussing the different types of projects, and I'm going to give you some recommendations of how to use PHPStan with a new project and a legacy project. And we're also going to play around with some generics at the end, just for fun. Okay, so recommendations for any project first. So regardless of if it's new to you or if it's a legacy thing, any project, the first thing I would definitely recommend is having a CI pipeline if you don't already. You want to have a CI pipeline which you can run yourself, so you can run it locally, and also you can run it on on the build pipeline. So what I'm saying is that the build pipeline and the thing that you're running locally do the same thing up to the point in which the Docker image or whatever it is you're doing gets built and then moved over. The order of this is incredibly important, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. So what we've got here is PHPCS. That is code sniffing. So this is going to be checking for styles, checking that braces are in the right places and other bits and pieces. That you could also use PHPCS for other interesting things, security audit checks and stuff like that. Then we do PHPStan, and then we do PHPUnit. Now, let's just say, for example, we do PHPUnit first. So we've done PHPUnit first, and then we check the code style, and then we do PHPStan. So the PHPUnit has just passed. You know, all the tests are good, everything's funky and happy. PHPCS is passed. Yay, everything's good. PHPStan fails. So, okay, our units have just passed, our code styles are okay, but PHPStan is saying that there's an error. We need to fix that error, but maybe that error is going to conflict with a PHPUnit test, or you know that you got to change some code, or maybe you need to refactor code or restructure code. Essentially, check the style first, do static analysis, and then check that your code actually adheres to your testing requirements. That should be the last one, in my opinion. So the test order is extremely important. And I mentioned about running them all in a command. So I used to be a fan of makefiles, but I'm now more a fan of doing it through composer scripts. So what I would suggest, if you were to use a makefile, for instance, you would have like commands that run things like, I've got things like test, testcs, teststan, test unit, test e2e, those kind of things. These are like make commands. And then I've got make test, which then runs all of those in one. I'm now migrating to Composer, the Composer way of doing it, because most of these commands are PHP anyway. So Composer test would then run the PHPCS, the PHPStan, and then the PHPUnit. Please, 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 please use a CI. Please, because this is putting a barrier between the code that is going to go into possibly a different build environment, and it's a gatekeeper between your merges, your PRs. So this will enforce that no code can be merged into main branches unless the CI fully passes. And something that I have witnessed before is when a build needs to get out the door quickly and there's a failure on PHPStan, for instance. And so we've ignored the error just to get the build out the door. But nobody's done any work to sort the error out after the build's gone out. So if your CI fails, that should be a priority to fix. Okay. The next one is to only test your code. This might sound a bit strange, but don't test the vendor directory, because that's not your code, it's not your responsibility. Don't test that. Also, don't test any code that has been automatically created. So migrations, for example, don't test those. You'll have it'll be painful if a migration fails and then keeps failing after every migration, and you have to fix that, and then because it's automated. So don't worry about those things. Okay, the next one is around upgrades. Be very mindful, be very careful with upgrades. Don't upgrade your framework or PHP version until you have fixed all the PHPStan errors. After upgrading your framework or PHP version, run PHPStan, as you may need to adjust your code. Okay, so you've just upgraded from PHP 7.4 to PHP 8. Now PHPStan has found a whole bunch of other fun to deal with. Okay, also, another thing that's caught me out before is, you know, Composer update. Oh, suddenly all your packages are updated, great. And you didn't realize that PHPStan was updated. So after upgrading PHPStan, run it again to check that other checks are accepting your code. Because what's happening with PHPStan as they're increasing their versions is they're throwing new checks in, they're adding new checks. So you want to make sure that when you update PHPStan, you're also getting the new checks and you're validating your code against those things. Don't just go, oh, I'm on level 9, it's fine, I'll never change. That's not going to happen. I've been caught out by that before. Okay, use other extensions that match your setup as well. So you might be using things like Doctrine, you may be using Symfony or Laravel. Those all have different rules that PHPStan can hook into. So they're all packages. So here, for instance, this one's PHPStan-Doctrine, this one's PHPStan-Symfony, and there's others as well. So you want to be finding out what you're using and then installing those extensions too. All right, so recommendations for new projects. So that was all recommendations for any project. Let's talk specifically about new ones. So I've hinted about the whole fact that ignoring errors and ignoring files and stuff in your configuration is dangerous. For a new project, it's very dangerous because it's new, and what tends to happen, in my experience at least, is if you ignore something, you'll forget about it, you forget that you've ignored it, and then you find out that actually when you unignore it, you've got a whole ton of more errors to deal with. So try and not ignore those errors if you can. Also, reduce the level that you're running against only if you're 100% sure that you cannot fix the issue. Ideally, you want to be running this at max level. So there is a max argument for the level, so -l max, and you could do it through the configuration there as well, level max. This ensures that whenever PHPStan is updated, you are constantly running against the latest and greatest checks. It's a new project. You should be running against the highest code standard out there. So use the max level. This will keep you at the highest possible level of PHPStan when it's upgraded. There's also, if you really want to get tough with it, use the PHPStan strict rules, which is an extension that you can either include, you can include the rules here once you've installed it, or if you're using the extensions installer, that will automatically be installed. So these are even stricter rules if you want to play with that. So that's new projects. What about legacy projects? Okay, so this is where you'll say you're new to the project, it's legacy to you, or maybe the developers of the original project have just, they're not there, so you've taken this hot potato. What you want to do, in my opinion, is to fix the PHPStan errors in a separate branch. You're going to have a bunch of features. You're going to have a bunch of bugs that you need to deal with. In my experience, not all features go live. So you could be doing a bunch of work on a feature and then it gets canned. If that happens and you've also added PHPStan fixes to that, then you have to unpick all of those fixes and put them in another branch for another PR. So you want to separate the two. Also, on a legacy project, you're going to have various different extensions. So as I mentioned with a new project, you want to be looking at the extensions that you're using and then and installing the extensions for PHPStan too. Okay. What I would also recommend for a legacy project, especially if it's never used static analysis before, is to run at the highest level once. And don't get scared by the output. I've done this before on a project, and I'm no kidding, we're talking tens of thousands of errors. But it's great to get a sense of the playing field. It was my first week on the job. I wanted to see what I got myself into. Ran PHPStan at the highest level and went, yeah, this is going to take some time. So don't be afraid of what you might find. Keep a note of how many errors you've got. That's your sort of target if you want to, if you want to go, yay, you've got 30 errors to go and you've just done like thousands. That's pretty cool. But what I would suggest is to start small and go up gradually. So start from level 0 and go up gradually. Go one level at a time. Going back a minute to the highest level, running it once. This is great if you're having a debate in your team or whether or not it's worth going for a rebuild or a rebuild stroke migration to a new world, because this will give you a sense of how bad the code is. Also, if you're new to the project, this will give you insights that you were never aware of before of code smells. And you can also see patterns in the chaos. These errors seem to be specifically to this file. Interesting. Does this file get used a lot? Also, you could find that there's a load of dead code that PHPStan is pulling out. So this would also give you a sense of the amount of technical debt that you're dealing with. Okay, but start small and go nice and gradually. Make sure you have tests to back up your changes as well in legacy. So you want to make sure that when you fix an issue that PHPStan has raised, you actually have a unit test to back up the changes that you've made. Because yes, it might be fixed in PHPStan's eyes, but you may have broken something, unit test-wise. For a legacy application that doesn't have a lot of tests, then I would probably suggest using acceptance tests first, because they're kind of a higher level, if you will, and then break it down to the units. Okay, so I think, in my opinion, that there's 3 confidence levels for legacy projects. The first one is that PHPStan is already in use and is running at the highest level, and it's working well. In this case, you've done your job, go and have a beer, it's all good, you've got a high confidence level. This rarely happens. PHPStan, this is confidence level 2. PHPStan is installed using a low level. This gives me a low confidence level. And this is actually quite a typical set, because normally when people run PHPStan of a legacy project, they probably aren't aware of the various levels, so they're just running off of level 0. So in this case, what you want to do is have a discussion with your team and just say, look, we're running at level 0. Can we not bump it up? And then what I would do is I would use the trick that I mentioned earlier of having phpstan.neon in git ignore to then bump up to the next level. This way you're not interfering with the continual integration pipeline. So run the next base level via PHPStan. Mention what needs to be fixed to your team. They simply may not be aware of the run levels. And what I would do, if you can, is in your sprint planning, see if you can sow the seeds, if you will, for having a maintenance period. If it's really bad, if it's like loads of errors, really, really bad, see if you can ask for a portion of your sprint to be maintenance. So we've found these errors. Can we fix them, please? But don't fix them all. Don't just go, okay, this week we are just going to fix everything, because that means that you've got to do a code freeze on all the features. That rarely happens. Or feature freeze, and that rarely happens. And then literally just rinse and repeat. So you do one level, you deploy that, you do another level, and you deploy that. The third confidence level is that PHPStan is just not installed. And in this case, this means that there is like hardly any confidence level there. So how do you install it on a legacy project? So what I would do is get the buy-in of the team. So they might not even be aware of what static analysis is. If that's the case, please show them the slides. Run at the highest level to see what needs fixing, then run each level, as I mentioned, to create a ticket per run level to say, in this sprint, we're going to deal with this run level. And then put the fixes in a separate branch, stroke PR, and in the PR, update the run level of phpstan.neon.dist, because that will update your continual integration pipeline. Okay, so now we're going to talk about generics. Generics are awesome. This you will get when you go past, I think, level 6, I believe, where it's dealing with all sorts, or level 9, when you're dealing with mixed, I forget. Anyway, so this is a challenge. Loop over an array of products, getting the ID of each product. Sounds right. Sounds easy, right? I mean, sounds easy. What about that array? So we have 3 classes, pre-order, subscription, product, but we've got a string. We've got a string in there. So how are we going to get the ID off of all of that? Now, in a legacy application that doesn't use static analysis, this is a typical workaround. So for each product, as product, if it's not an instance of product, if it's not an instance of subscription, and if it's not an instance of pre-order, then continue. Okay, now it's going to be an instance of product or subscription or pre-order, and therefore, because they have IDs, we can get the ID. Now, I know that this is a little bit of a crazy example here, and I know that some of you are probably shouting out saying, just use an interface. But I wanted to show you that we have to do this sometimes, because going back to the example that I have just, going back to the example, we can't predict what is going in here. We could have integers, we could have other arrays, nested arrays in here, because we haven't explained what products is, what the shape of that array is. Also, this could go inside a function. So we've got an array of products, and we're doing the same thing. So we're looping through products as product to get this. But is product actually an instance of product? We don't know. It's just an array. It's just an array. It's just an array. This leads to messy code. So checks get completely out of hand, like you've just seen the 3 lines of checks there. It's not very readable, and therefore it's prone to mistakes. So this is an example of using generics, where we are actually defining the array structure. So array int, it's a product, it's a subscription, it's a pre-order, or it's a string. So that's what the array is. And therefore, the check is just saying, if is string, continue. Because if it's not a string, then we know it's a product, a subscription, or a pre-order. So it cleans it up. You can actually read that far better than the other example, in my opinion. It documents what the array does. And it's great for auto-completion as well. Ideally, you would obviously use an interface I've mentioned for all of this, but I just wanted to give you an example. Okay, so this moves us on to the next bit, which is when to use annotations or native type hints. So it's completely up to you, totally up to you, but I have my own opinions on it. So here we go. Don't double up. Don't double up. If you can use a native type hint where possible, use them. Use annotations when you can't use native type hints. I'll explain what I mean in a minute. So I'm not a fan of code documentation. I love the fact that PHP 8 now allows you to self-document the code in the code, right? I used to be a stickler for going through PHP doc, the PHP documenter, and just being so OCD, you know, it has to have a return, it has to have parameters. We have to explain what it is, you know, even if it's blatantly obvious what it's doing. And I used to love that. And I used to have, like in my build pipeline, I used to have PHP Documenter actually producing documents for me to then go and see as web pages. And I loved it. That's an insight to my little sad brain. But this is an example of using both native type hints and the annotation. So this is an annotation. It's a little bit smaller than the other one. So we've got, I flipped them around just for fun. So you've got strings for the keys here and then integers for the values here. But this is the annotation, you see, and this is the native type. In my opinion, you have to do this because you're explaining what's in here, but you're saying that it's an array as a return. But this is where I've changed my mind. When we have a getter, an accessor like this, where we've got get name and it's returning a string, there is no need, in my opinion, to have a doc block, because you're just saying return string, where you can see it's returning a string. So in my opinion, there's no need to have any annotations, but that's the hill I'm going to die on anyway. Now, if none of this is making you think that static analysis is great, and if you're struggling getting buy-in by your company, or whoever you're working for, then show them this. Static analysis could save you money. I've worked on projects before where we were using, say, Bugsnag or Sentry or something that would pick up errors that the users were seeing. And Bugsnag and Sentry in particular, they have a payment model where the number of events that get fired represent or add to the amount that you have to pay for it every month, right? So obviously, to save money, you want to reduce the amount of bad events that are happening. So if you're relying on Bugsnag or Sentry to catch errors that static analysis can catch, then you're doing it wrong, in my opinion. And that is it. Thank you very much. It's been great. That's the QR code.
Are you taking questions?
Yes, please, fire away.
I was wondering through your talk what's behind end-to-end, because you said how important it was,
Oh.
and you didn't define it, then you defined it as continuous integration, but then you also defined another unknown term, PR.
Okay, so continual integration is when you're continually integrating your code into the rest of the code. So it's a pipeline of, say, code sniffing, PHPStan, and then PHP unit, or whatever, PHP mess detection. So it's a sort of a series of gatekeepers, and what you can do is have those checks running magically in the background when you do a push. When you do a git push, it would then, your build pipeline would then spin off and then run that. And if any of that fails in the pipeline, then it will not allow you to merge that code into one of the main branches. And a PR is a pull request. So this is where you're requesting the pull of your code into another branch.
And you do that in GitHub normally?
Yeah.
Any more clarification on that? I've got a couple of questions as well. Has anyone else got any questions? Oh, yeah, over there, thank you.
No, I just wanted to add something. I've been working on a project that was written in 3.4 Symphony.
Right.
At that time, PHPStan was not added. Later on, when we upgraded Symphony 4, added PHPStan. But we found that is a loss of power into level 2. And we found that baseline was a lot. So I just wanted to add this probably in the legacy application if you use baseline to ignore. You touched it.
Yeah, I should have added that as a configuration rule, but yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
I suppose I've got a question. How is it that we can have so many errors and our code appears to work?
Wow, that's an interesting question. How does our code work when it's throwing a bunch of errors?
Yeah, so for example, we've got we've got lots of people in the room, they've all got different levels. So you might be thinking, well, if the code's got errors in it, how is it possibly working? Or PHPStan says there's errors. How can my code still work? Even if PHPStan's telling me a bit about there's a potential problem with the code, something that I can clearly see is working.
Right, yes. So this is where you sort of just refresh the page and you're like, oh, well, it works. So what's this error talking about? Yeah. Well, this can happen when the code isn't technically compliant with the rules that you set out to PHPStan. So, for example, I mentioned with return type hinting and stuff, these are now requirements or not required, these have been added in PHP 8. So if you want to keep upgrading your versions of PHP and you want to be using the latest and greatest stuff, then there are requirements for your code to be compliant to that. So this will help you upgrading your code. Does that?
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. What code editor do you use, and do you have any plugins that help you help prevent you from doing these things in the first place?
Yeah. So I use PHPStan. I love it. Sorry, PHP Storm. Everything got an S. Yeah, PHP Storm, and I love it. I used to use NetBeans, and I used to use like, gosh, I forget. Atom, I think it was called. But PHPStan's great, and with that you can hook into composer.json, so it will find the packages that you're running, and then you can run those commands. So the command of vendor PHPStan analyze src in the background, so just by pressing a button. But I personally prefer to get into the actual command line and actually mimic what the CI is doing, the pipeline's doing. So I will tend to move from PHPStan to the terminal quite quickly and do it like that.
Thanks.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I learned a lot. I feel like you definitely present a lot of like best practice scenarios. But what would you say is kind of standard in a sort of like production environment? Like, you know, this is obviously like the kind of best case scenario, but what would you say is the kind of not necessarily the norm, but what would you say is the best case scenario for a production environment? Basically?
So what is the best case for a production environment, or what is the norm of a production?
Like strict deadlines, maybe every couple of sprints stuff needs to go out. What's the kind of part of it?
Yeah, so have a CI to start with. Have some base levels running. So whether it's 0 or 1, just have something that will prevent any bad code coming in. Have these gates around PRs where the code is being checked statically and through tests before it gets merged before your feature branch gets merged into the main or master branch. So that would be the baseline. What I've seen in the wild is crazy, where we don't have a CI. The nobody knows what PHPStan is or static analysis, and I've come in and done an audit because there was a question as to whether or not we should do a rebuild or a migration. The team was like, no, it kind of works because we're just refreshing the page, it's fine. And also there was a question of we wanted to move from or upgrade from Symfony, I think it was like 2 to Symfony 4 or whatever, 3. And we needed to do an investigation as to how we can do this. So we therefore needed to do a bunch of auditing. And it was only once we did the auditing, we discovered actually there's a lot of problems in this code. And just because, going back to the point of if you refresh the page and it works for you, just because it works for you doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work for the other 10,000 customers who are on different browsers, who have got different accounts in different states. You know, just because you refresh the page and you see something coming back doesn't mean that it's the same for everyone else.
Thank you, great talk. I have one question. Is there a way, let's say in a legacy project, to by default for existing code to run PHPStan at level 0 or low level, but then for any new code that comes in that you write, to run it up to maximum level?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would run the phpstan.neon.dist, put that in your CI, or so your existing code will run against that level. And then what I would do is I would use phpstan.neon, which would override the dist one, with the next level up above. So when you run that, your CI will actually use phpstan, or your build will use that and override the base level. That's a great way of discovering what is coming up next.
Won't that show you existing issues at a higher level? Sorry, what's your question? How do you only do it for new?
Yeah, exactly. Like new code that comes in, is the way to run that, like at the highest level, but don't worry about all the existing errors.
I don't follow. Sorry.
Okay, so let's say in a legacy project you have tons of errors, so
Yeah.
that's why you set it to level 0 to not complain about those things. But then for any new code that you write, for example, you write a new class and you add it to the project, you want to analyze that code at the highest standards available, so that your new class is absolutely adhering to.
Well, yeah, so if you were to run on a higher level, it will also run the lower levels as well. So if you were to run it from level 1, you're still going to get level 0. So if your legacy application is failing at level 0, but you also want to check from level 1, you'll have to fix what's in level 0. But if it's a new class, so if it's a new piece of code and you just want to ignore everything else, then you can use in the configuration, I've got a slide where you can use, I think it's a glob pattern in the configuration to say ignore, and then you can give it a path to all the code, and then you would ignore that. Or if you just want to target a file, you can do that too. So when you do PHPStan analyze, instead of giving the folder src to the whole lot, to the global lot, you just give the path to your new file, and you give it a run level. So level max to get the maximum level 1.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Is there a way to like
I've
target
been blinded.
specific methods instead of like the whole file?
Sorry, I didn't get that, sorry.
Is there a way to analyze specific methods instead of like the whole file or the whole project?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question.
Because if I would create like a new feature that only is like I'm adding a few extra methods to this existing legacy code base that is absolutely horrible, and like boss doesn't want to like spend time on actually making it better, then
I don't actually know the answer to that question. That's an interesting one. I know that you can ignore like errors. Yeah, sure.
I have this in the current process. In PHPStan, you can add custom role.
Right.
And the custom role you can identify when the method starts and method finished. And then as soon as started, you can start investigation. I did not investigate a specific this issue, but I think it's possible in the custom role. I have done with define custom rules, define script, and it's work from with the new file, but you don't all the existing files.
Okay.
I think there's another option in PHPStan. You could, suppose you want to do all your new stuff at level 9, or whatever level you want, and you could run, you get it into the state you want to, that's your kind of, and then you run it at whatever level you want to do all your new code out and create a baseline, and check that baseline in. And then there's some config for the baseline and config.
Yep.
And then what that will do is it will ignore all the issues that are in the baseline. But you will still have issues where your new code is interfacing with the old code. The old code doesn't have typing or type declaration. Then you might get new errors because of that. But then you've just got to take those ones on a case by case. But essentially, completely new code will be unaffected by this as well. That's another way.
Cool. I will be adding that to the slides, the baseline. Yep, cool.
The nice thing about baseline as well, and like you said about ignoring stuff is dangerous. If you're just going to say ignore, the way I see a lot is you shouldn't use / Drupal thing, you should do dependency injection. My current project has that a lot. So rather than just say ignore it completely, and when it generates the baseline, it says we're going to ignore this error in this file X number of times as well. So it's very quite specific in terms of what it's doing. And then if we refactor some code, it says, well, you said you would ignore this twice, but now it's only in there once. It is giving you that constant reminder, unless you tell it not to, that you should be maintaining over time rather than just setting and forgetting it.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for the talk, first of all. But I just wanted to clarify a point. If in both cases we're unit testing, is the main difference between using PHPStan and just relying on, say, PHPStorm to throw errors? That PHPStorm will say this is the problems that are stopping you running your code. PHPStan is saying I've ran your code and this is what has happened. Just kind of clarify.
So PHPStan will not only say I've ran your code and this has failed, but it will also offer you the fix. So it will say that we try to run this method, but the return type is a string, but actually it's returning both a string and a null. If I was to use PHPStan, I would configure PHPStorm to use PHPStan and rely on that personally. Yep.
Earlier, you showed this line that you can specify which line PHPStan ignores.
Yep.
Is there more to that? Sorry, just curiosity. Do you have to repeat that every single line, or is there like a command you can say ignore the next 4 lines?
I believe there is a way that you can ignore, well, in the configuration at least, you can ignore files and ignore folders of files. Yes, you would have to run it for each line, but then if you wanted to, you could ignore a method by putting it at the top of the method.
I was just saying because with your question, like let's say this legacy file, but then you added a new method there. Can you just wrap the previous code with like that ignore file that just put like a close?
I would do that through configuration. So I would ignore I would have a regular expression in the configuration to ignore that particular method, or you know, if you've got a collection of methods, or if you've got a class that you wanted to ignore, I would do that through config. I lean on configuration more than actually ignoring stuff in the code. The reason being is that you're ignoring it in one place. You don't, in my opinion, you don't want to have your code littered with ignore line, because that's quite kind of, you know, annoying. Yep.
So in the example that you used, you say like you get the error where you expected like a string to return a string, and instead it can return null or a string.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way that you fixed it is by changing the return type so that it says it can return null or a string.
Mm.
How do I know that that's the way to fix it, and not that I wanted to return a string and not null, so something somewhere else in my code is going wrong, and that's why?
Yes, that's a really great question. That is, yes, so it's broken, but it's actually working, as in like, this is what it should be doing. If that is the case, so if that's the case, then you would update so you could either use mixed, so it just returns anything, or you would define it through the annotation to say what it is that you purposely want to return. And that is, you're being quite strict and hard on yourself. You're saying this is what it should return. This is the whole point of the upgrades of PHP 8, in a sense, to be a little bit more strict with our types, and to have our code to be as documented as much as possible. And of course, it helps with code completion. Yeah.
So suppose in that example, you know, if say it's returned back always a string.
Yeah.
Like we said, we've adjusted the return type to say null or string.
Yeah.
The other way would be if it's always going to return a string.
Yeah.
Whether it's empty or not. You know, it's just always going to return a string.
Yeah.
That's where maybe the tests, the PHP unit sort of test would be quite useful.
Yeah.
So that you've got, it returns a string with a thing or an empty string, you know, and that's where that gets tested somewhere else.
Yeah, well, we're sailing very closely to the mutation testing sort of side of things, where you're actually changing the behavior of the code on the fly to try and return various different things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also then I've used assertion libraries like the web Mozart one, and I can sort of say assert string not empty or something in my code. Essentially, it's a shortcut that says, if I do get a string that's empty, throw exception.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So I sort of use a mixture of both, which is quite nice.
Nice.
And yeah, so that's where I sort of cover tests. Like if I've got an empty string, what then happens?
Yeah.
But the return type is fine because it's still returning a string.
Yeah.
So PHPStan is happy. We need to deal with that somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's actually neat.
And this is why I would definitely recommend having a unit test to back up the changes that you're making in PHPStan. Especially in a legacy application, because as you rightly said, it might be technically broken, but it actually will be doing the thing that it needs to do. In that case, it needs to be defined.
For example, and it's like a person registers, you expect the person to have a name. The person always needs to have a name. It can't be null or an empty string.
Yeah.
So then, if you don't have any validation when you save it to ensure that that's what the person put in, then
Yeah.
that's where your error is, and it's not going to fix it by just allowing empty strings or no.
Yep.
Brilliant. Are you staying around for that? Yeah, brilliant. So,
Yeah.
thanks so much. Great talk.
Thank you. Thank you.